Hi, everybody. It's been 2 weeks. I know no one's counting, but I was. And I was like, I can't wait to be back. And I'm so happy to be back. So, hello, everyone, again. And thank you for joining us again on our Wisdom Wednesday session at Metta Center. So, as always, I would start by inviting you to come back to the present moment. This is the only moment that we actually have in our minds. We create the past and we create the future, and our mind goes to the past and goes to the future, but really, like, the present moment is the only moment that really matters, that we actually can experience. And we always forget throughout the day, but this is really the chance to come back to the present moment, let go of everything else that might be have been burdening you throughout the day or throughout the week, and just take this time for yourself and with each other as we share this experience and learn from Ajahn Sadaro, who very luckily joined us today. We have him speaking on a very interesting topic. So before I start as well, I would like to show my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting takes place. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Darug people, who are the traditional owners of the land which we stand, and as well wherever land that you're coming from as well. So today our topic is, what is emptiness? What is emptiness? Is it not just empty of nothing? But maybe it's like a little bit more than that. Maybe it's a bit more than nothing. But like, I guess we'll find out a bit more today. And we have Ajahn Sadaro joining us to talk to us about this topic. A bit about Ajahn first. Ajahn ordained in the forest tradition in Thailand in 2006. After practicing throughout Southeast Asia, he returned to Australia in 2015 and now resides at the Newbury Buddhist Monastery in Melbourne. We actually met Ajahn Sadaro in Victoria, and we did our little pilgrimage, had a really lovely chat. And Ajahn has visited us a few times as well, doing retreats and talks. And yeah, we're very happy to have Ajahn back to talk to us about this topic. So as always, this will be an interactive session. Ajahn will start with a short meditation and an introduction to the topic, and then I will help to jump in and facilitate a bit of a conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. But if you don't feel comfortable to share them with everyone, you can also directly message me, and I'll ask the question for you as well. And if you're in person, please, we should have paper and pen on the side of the room. But if there isn't, you can also let Tina know, and she will be able to let me know to ask the question. This session will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube. And without further ado, over to you, Ajahn. And all of that is okay with you too.
That's fine. Just a quick clarification. So we do a little bit of meditation first, and then go into the talk. Is that is that right?
Yeah, so usually we do a bit of meditation, 10 to 20 minutes, however you like,
Yep.
to settle the mind, and then a talk, and then Q&A. And usually I'll just read the questions they have, so you don't have to actually go into their. Hopefully it makes it easier. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to know how long you do the meditation for, but again, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to give a talk. Haven't given one to Metta Center for a while, so it's nice to see that you're see you all still here, see you all still practicing. This is, it's really encouraging when you see people that are continuing to practice over years. You see a lot of people come and go, so to see the same people come back again that are still practicing and still wanting to learn, and still keeping their mind open, I think is a really, really useful and inspiring thing to see. So yeah, tonight I'm talking about what is emptiness, and I love this topic. I love talking about this stuff. Hopefully I won't talk for too long, because I think this is an endlessly fascinating topic, and it's also very conceptually confusing as well. So hopefully we can sort of maybe hone down on a few areas and try to make it at least a little bit clearer about what we maybe mean by emptiness. And so with that, thinking of emptiness as a theme, we'll do a little bit of meditation first, then, and do a guided meditation. See, if you can get into emptiness, fantastic. You don't need me to guide you, but if I'll do my best to get you there in some kind of way. So with that, we'll start with a short guided meditation then. Just take a comfortable seat. Maybe take a few deep breaths. Allow yourself to arrive at what you're doing right now. Just simply sitting. You could notice the sounds. Notice the way your body feels, its weight, any sensations in it. Even take a moment to take stock of your mental state or how you feel right now. You might have had a busy day, may have rushed to get here, so you're a little bit wound up. Or even you might be ready to sit and listen to the Dhamma, so you're already calm. Whatever mental state or feeling you have, just take stock of it. And we can just begin to settle into our regular method of meditation, whatever that may be. For example, the breath, or a mantra, or kindness meditation, whatever it is that we usually practice that brings us some calm and stillness. Settle into that for a few minutes. If you can pay a little closer attention to your meditation object, refine and hone in your awareness on that object. Anything that's maybe pulling you away from it, just see if you can simply release those distractions. See now if you can start to gently pull your awareness back in some way, where you're opening up and simply observing your experience, this feeling of being you sitting here now. See if you can notice one thing that's maybe prominent in your experience now. It might be sounds, might be the thoughts that are popping up in your head, or the feeling of the body, or even might be recognizing the visual field. Whichever one seems most obvious to you. And whatever it is, again, see if you can pull back, just observe it in an objective manner. Notice if there's any kind of identification with this object. Is there a feeling of, I am sitting here, and I hear these sounds? Or I'm thinking a particular thought. Notice if there is any kind of identification with this experience. And if there is, see if you can ask yourself, what is this thing that's identifying? Who's the one that's identifying? Is there some sort of essence of me that's identifying with things? If you can notice if there is that subtle grasping at experience, grasping that I experience this, or I hear this, or I think this. To see if just for a moment you can release that grasping, release that identification, and just allow phenomena to arise and disappear on its own. Again, just turn inwards and notice any kind of grasping identification. And just turn inwards and ask, who is it that's identifying? Who is it that's grasping? Or what is it? This isn't necessarily a question you have to answer. It's just a way of looking, a way of seeing, a way of observing. Just look. No need to figure it out. Simply look at who is identifying with experience. In the final few moments, just come back to your regular method of meditation, like the breath or mantra. Feel the weight of your body. Notice the sounds around you. And you can start to gently adjust your posture. Take a few deep breaths, and you feel the time is right, you can open your eyes and we'll end the meditation here. Good. Very nice. Hopefully you had a good sit. Nice when we can start these things off and you have a decent sit for the night. If anybody's comfortable as well and you want to turn your camera on, you're more than welcome. It makes me feel a little bit better that other people are listening to me and I'm not just talking to black squares. Only if you're comfortable though. No pressure to do it, obviously. But it's nice to see everybody. So yeah, very good. So again, very, very grateful to be here tonight. Grateful to see a lot of people tuning in, which is really, really nice. It's encouraging. It's encouraging to do. And yeah, as we said at the outset, I'm going to be talking, sort of pondering on this question of what is emptiness. Emptiness from the Buddhist perspective, we call emptiness sunyata. So I'll probably use the terms interchangeably, whatever suits the purpose. And for most people, emptiness really does seem like this very deep and profound state that we might have. It might be seen as this kind of very esoteric teaching. It might be, might have many different ideas about what emptiness is. We might even think that emptiness, well, it might be like sort of like nothing. It's so hopefully tonight we can sort of clear some of this up. But what we're going to be moving towards is that I think the most powerful reflection on what emptiness is that it's not necessarily a thing in itself, but more a way of seeing our experience, more a way of observing our experience. I think this is where emptiness is its most powerful, when we use it as a way to relate to or perceive our experience as we have it. So the best way, I think, to start with talking about what emptiness is to describe what it's not first, to get a few things off the table of what it's not. So emptiness, as sunyata in this Buddhist perspective, it's not nothingness. It's not like there's no thing there at all. It's not like there's some kind of vacuum or void where nothing happens. It's also not the position that the world is unreal in some way, or that there is no world out there. This is a kind of what we call illusionism. It's not this illusionism that the world is unreal or that there's not a kind of world out there. And it's also not non-existence. So we might think, emptiness is nothingness, void. So this is non-existence in some kind of way. And it's not this either. You could say that's a form of annihilation. And that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about sunyata from the Buddhist perspective. So now that we sort of know what it's not, it's a bit easier to start to get a grip on what it actually is. And again, I think there's a very pragmatic way we can understand what emptiness is. So there is a certain kind of metaphysical view about what emptiness is from a Buddhist perspective. But again, what I think is the most powerful way to relate to emptiness is that it is a way of seeing. It is a way of viewing phenomena and viewing our experience. It's emptiness of a thing. It's emptiness of phenomena, not that there is no thing, not that there is no phenomena. So what it is, it's this kind of realization or way of seeing that nothing whatsoever has any kind of inherent and independent existence. So it's not like something that is there by itself. More in that things are deeply interrelated in this kind of way, and they have again, because they have no independent existence, they have an interdependent existence. So sometimes we can think of it in this way, of a dependent origination, that things are dependent on other things in the world. So it's this realization that things don't have this inherent essence or substance. It's just phenomena that appears in the world. And they're just phenomena that appears in the world that is interdependently arisen. Again, meaning they're not independent, they're not separate, they're not an autonomous thing. So this is one way that we can sort of relate and view phenomena in this way. But in this, I think there's also like a deeper way that we can look at what emptiness is. This is a very profound way where we start to look at existence as that what we perceive in the world and what we experience in the world, it's dependent on us being conscious. It's dependent on from a Buddhist perspective, it's dependent on the mind. It's dependent on the way that we're perceiving reality in some way. And understanding how the ways that we look at things, when we do this, we start to understand that we're sort of constructing experience in every moment. We're sort of construct experience up. So right now I see a computer, I see some squares with some people. There's a kind of construction there that, okay, there's people there, there's these little objects, and now they're becoming people. They're forming a higher order concept in my mind that there's people out there. I'm talking, I can see my hands in front of me, all these things. Basically, I'm constructing experience in every moment from my mind, from my conscious experience. And so if we understand that we're always constructing the world or constructing what we perceive in this way, we start to understand of how we start to identify with things, because it is an appearance to us. We construct the world and it appears in a particular way, and we start to identify with things in the world. and if we start to realize that the more we're constructing our perception of the world in a particular way, and the more we're identifying with it, and the more we're building it in this way, if we start to understand this, we can start to see that how we examine our experience, again, how we see phenomena in a particular way, starts to allow us to unbind and to start to loosen our grip on these things that we usually identify with and we usually think are solid. Again, I see the computer in squares in front of me. I think it's a solid computer, but really this is just an appearance in my experience. If I start to see this, this is just a visual image that's arising. There's no more identification with it, and you start to loosen your grip. You start to unbind your identification with that. So nothing sort of is existent that's independent in any kind of way. Again, it's all dependent on consciousness being here, arising, and phenomena out in the world coming into contact with it, and a kind of construction here. So seeing emptiness in this kind of way, where we're just seeing that it's a constructed process, there's nobody there that's really identifying, this allows us to start to free our grips on it, free our grasping towards it. So this is, again, I think this is the most sort of powerful way that we can think about emptiness, that we can see it as, again, we're just constructing the world and we're identifying with it, but it's really, all it is interdependent phenomena that's arising and passing away. Doesn't really have an essence. It doesn't really have an independence there. Now, but when we start to get a little bit more technical with these things, so that's a more of a practical way to view it. But when we look at a more technical way of viewing what emptiness is, then we have very different conceptualizations in Buddhism about what emptiness is. Mainly what I'll draw a lot of what I talk about tonight from is more the kind of the early Buddhist texts and the things that we find in the early in the Pali Canon. We can also sort of see when we look at other early Buddhist texts like the Chinese Agamas and things like this, what they generally relate to emptiness, they relate it to dependent origination. So they see dependent origination as something that is inherently empty. It's just a process that happens. And this was really cool that that this came up in the early Buddhist texts in the Chinese Agamas here. So the simple sort of version of dependent origination is when this arises, that arises. When there is this, there is that. With the ceasing of this comes the ceasing of that. When this ceases to exist, that ceases to exist. So again, it's this kind of interdependent relationship. It's not something that's independent. That understanding emptiness in terms of a dependent origination, this is something really Nagarjuna really picked up on. And he basically became famous for talking about emptiness in this way, emptiness in relation to dependent origination. When we sort of look at maybe some of the later Theravada-based stuff, things in the Visuddhimagga and things like that, and the Abhidhamma, thinking about the way these kinds of texts thought about sunyata was that all dhammas were empty, like dhamma sunyata. So all dhamma, all phenomena are empty. So that sort of aligns a little bit with the way that I was talking about it at the start. And when we get to the very later kind of Theravada, the kind of, Buddhaghosa, Visuddhimagga onwards, we're starting to really think about emptiness in terms of the five aggregates, that the five aggregates are inherently empty. They don't have a self, they don't have a substance. These aggregates are just phenomena that appears, they're inherently empty. Now, when we get into some of, again, not all of the Mahayana-based conceptualizations of what emptiness is, what a lot of those point to, again, is this understanding, a little bit more of this understanding that all entities, all dhammas are empty of some kind of self. They're empty of some kind of essential core. They're basically just sabhava. They're just sabhava dhammas. They're just nature according to what nature is. Some later Madhyamika schools go into this idea that things are only constructs. Things only conceptually exist within our mind, and therefore all existence is illusory. And so nothing ultimately exists. But this does fall a little bit into the kind of illusionism that I was talking about, where we think, that the world is absolutely illusory, that there is no world there, that it's just something that's purely created in the mind, i.e. a kind of, easy way to think of this is like, the Matrix kind of thing. It's all just created in the mind, that there's not the real world of the Matrix. There's another real world out there. So I think some of those conceptualizations of emptiness, I think maybe take it a little bit too far, but yeah, I could be wrong about these things. I'm always happy to be wrong about things. If I get there and it's like, oh, no, they were right, then I'd be pretty happy with that as well. So when we start to think a little bit more about emptiness in terms of, these early Buddhist texts, the way they see emptiness is they see it, I think, mainly in three main ways. The first is that it's an attribute of phenomena. So it's a part of phenomena in some way. We can describe sunyata, emptiness, also as a meditative state. So a kind of meditation you can enter, a kind of meditation technique and a state that you can enter into as well. And you could say like the highest kind of sunyata is the liberation of the mind. So you can have a liberation through emptiness. So there's these different ways we can think about it. So when we think about it as in the first way as an attribute of phenomena, this is just a fancy way of saying that, things don't have any essence. Any kind of thing in the world, it lacks any self, it lacks any essence, it lacks any self or anything pertaining to a self in any kind of way. So essentially, emptiness as an attribute of phenomena is just really the teaching of anatta, that things are not self. There is this really nice sutta called the Sunya Sutta. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya, I think. And this is where Ananda is actually talking to the Buddha, and he asks the Buddha, is like, the Buddha said the world is empty, the world is empty. So Ananda asks him, well, in what way is the world empty? And then the Buddha answered by, the world is empty because it's empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self. And so what is empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body and tactile feelings, thinking. All these things are empty of a self. So is contact, so is the consciousness that's dependent on that. These are all empty of a self or anything pertaining to a self. So we can see emptiness in this sense, again, is this kind of way that we're sort of viewing phenomena, the way that we're viewing our sensory experience, things that we see, things that we hear, things that we taste, things that we touch, things that we think of in our minds. This is just empty. It doesn't have an essence. It doesn't have a substance. It doesn't have a self. It's just phenomena that arises. There's some really cool, there's some really cool things in the suttas as well, where the Buddha talks about comparing different different aggregates to these as empty in a particular kind of way. And the Buddha, for example, the Buddha talked about emptiness in terms of the 5 aggregates as well, and he compared material form to like a glob of foam. So basically, it's just foam. So when you see foam, you pick it up, and it's like it's it's not really substantive, you know, like foam from water. You just pick it up. It's not really substantive. You might look at it and go, well, it's this, you know, sort of round thing of white mass or whatever. But as soon as you grab it, there's no sort of real essence within it. He also compared like feelings to like bubbles, like just bubbles that arise. Again, we think bubbles are something that are substantive, but you know, we touch them, they don't really have an essence there. And probably the coolest one is he compared perception to like a mirage. So, you know, when we see a mirage in the desert, you know, we think that there's water or something out there, but then when we're just misperceiving this thing. So it's like a kind of our perception is like a mirage. It doesn't have a kind of essence there. And the kind of sankharas, you compared this to like a banana tree. You know, when you cut, usually when you cut a normal tree down, it has heartwood. If you cut a banana tree down, it's just layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, and you get to the middle and there's nothing really there. And I said the mirage is the coolest one, but I think when he talks about consciousness, that's probably the cooler one, because he talks about consciousness like a magic trick. So, you know, you can think about a magic trick when you see it for the first time, you think, man, this is how does this happen? This is miraculous. That has to be magical. But as soon as you know how the magic trick works, it's like, oh, okay, I can never unsee this. So it's not so something. It is something that is deceiving in some kind of way. But once you know how this thing works, it's like, oh, it's not really magic in this any way. It's just something that happens in the world. So thinking about the aggregates in this way, the Buddha encourages us just to see them. We look at them, we observe them, and we can see them as empty, as void, as without substance or without any kind of essence. So the Buddha asks in that sutra is like, what essence or substance is there in foam? What is there in a magic trick? What is there in a mirage? What essence or substance do these things have? And then he ended it up by saying, monks, see everything that is past, present, and past, future, or present, internal, so things that we experience, or external, things that are coarse or subtle, common or sublime, far or near. See them all as empty and void. So again, everything that we have in our experience. So we can see here that, you know, when the Buddha is talking about what emptiness is, emptiness as an attribute of phenomena, he's talking about the 5 aggregates, and he's talking about the 6 sense bases, that these are just totally empty, they're totally void. When we start to think of emptiness as a meditative state, this is the sort of the one that becomes the most interesting. And because it becomes this kind of thing, oh, how do I get this thing now? How do I do this? How do I get into this state of emptiness? And the way that we find in the early Buddhist texts is that the way we get into this meditative state is that we don't attend to any themes or any signs in meditation. So what do I mean by any kind of themes or any kind of signs? This is where, you know, we usually, when we pay attention to something in our meditation, we have like a kind of object in our awareness. But we can get to a state where there's no objects within our awareness anymore. It is just a kind of void. There is no sign, there is no theme, there is no thing there for us to hold on to. It's just empty and open and spaciousness. So any kind of object that is within the mind to some extent, even if we are using it skillfully to pay attention in some kind of way, because we're still identifying with this thing, then it is in some way, even though it's very, very refined, can be causing some kind of slight mental tension that's in there. So if we can recognize that anytime we're consciously experiencing something, we're realizing that there's an object there or there's a theme there. If we can sort of release our attachment to it, if we can release our identification with it, we start to experience gradiated kinds of emptiness. So say for example, now it's like I look out in the world, I see the world around me, I see a computer, a vacuum cleaner, all these kinds of things. I look out in my experience now, but so there's these things, there's these objects in the world, but there's no elephants in the room. There's no elephant there. So the room and what I experience, it's empty of elephants. Now, if I close my eyes, now with my eyes closed, I can't, the visual things that I saw, a computer, a vacuum cleaner, my experience is now empty of those things. But I still have this kind of thoughts coming up in the mind. I still have these maybe images that pop into my mind. I still have a feeling of a body. Once we start to be able to become more and more concentrated, we actually start to let some of these things go. The thoughts go. And so if thoughts become still, then your experience is empty of thoughts. So again, it's this progressive letting go of external phenomena in this kind of way, where we're letting go of themes, we're letting go of signs. So the sign of the visual things that I see in the world, that's a theme, that's a sign. I close my eyes, that theme, that sign is gone and it is empty of that. And we just progressively get deeper and deeper with these things. So this is how the Buddha encourages us in this way to reflect on experience, and we can progressively see a kind of emptiness. And this is where like really good samadhi actually comes into it, though, because it's one thing to go, well, okay, yeah, there's no elephants in the room now. I close my eyes, these things are gone. I can do some of these things, but then there's still things that arise in the mind. It's only when we can really access the jhanas quite well that we actually start to move more towards this very, very deep state of emptiness. So say, for example, when one starts to move through the jhanas, one starts to move into these kind of like the higher jhanas, what they call the arupa jhanas. So this is where you get into you have the perception of the dimension of space, the perception of the dimension of nothingness, perception of neither perception or non-perception. So every time you have a perception of those things, so even though you have the perception of space in the arupa jhanas, when you move to the perception of nothingness, now your perception is empty of the perception of space. So you let this thing go. You become more and more still, and there's only nothingness in there. But there's still a perception of nothingness. There's still an identification. There is nothing. You let that go, and you can move into the realm of either perception, neither perception or non-perception. The more we can do that, and if we can sort of get past this aspect of even identifying with or even having the theme of neither perception or non-perception in the mind, this is where you can actually release into this state of pure emptiness. So the state of pure emptiness is, again, it's a really, really deep state. It's past like the arupa jhanas. But this doesn't mean that if we don't have the arupa jhanas, we can't have this, we can't have a similar kind of experience. Again, emptiness is this progressive letting go of things in our experience. The more we let go of that thing, our experience becomes empty of that thing. So while we, try to move towards this kind of, beyond the arupa jhana kind of emptiness, we still can actually perceive some forms of emptiness in our experience. And so the last kind of emptiness that we find, last kind of sunyata we find in the suttas is where with emptiness as a kind of release. And this is where we don't perceive phenomena in terms of a self anymore, but we just see them as dukkha arising and passing away. You know, usually, again, dukkha arises and passes away and we identify with it. You know, a phenomena arises and passes away and we identify with it. But if we no longer perceive things in terms of a self, then these things become empty of a self and the mind starts to become released and it becomes unbound and starts to become liberated. So again, there's this, you know, we can move through the jhanas and we start to see this deep kind of experience of emptiness. And from that, one can see that there really is no essence, there is no self in experience, and sees that at a very, very deep level. And this is where we start to realize that even this state of emptiness, and this is, I'll read this actually. This is something from the Majjhima Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya 121. It's from the short discourse on emptiness. And this is where the Buddha talks about, again, we go through the Arupa jhanas, and when we get to this state of emptiness, and the Buddha says here is like, this is when you see that even this is something that is constructed. Even this is a kind of sankhara. Even emptiness is a kind of sankhara, even if we're perceiving this thing. And so whatever is sankhara, it's mentally fashioned in some kind of way. And at that point, the meditator, they reflect with wisdom. Whatever is fabricated or constructed, it's impermanent and it's subject to cessation. And it's at this point, if somebody can recognize this is where one is fully liberated. One attains nibbana in these kinds of states. So this is the way that we sort of have emptiness as a kind of liberation of the mind as well. So I think, you know, there's, you know, we can get into sort of the technicalities of these things. And again, these things are interesting, but it's like, well, okay, but the bottom line is like, now, but how do you practice these kind of things? How do you practice looking at phenomena as empty? How do you practice it as a kind of meditative practice? How do you practice it as a moving towards a particular kind of state? How do you practice it as a way to actually experience release? So I think, again, getting back to what I started the talk talking about, is that when we start to realize that we're identifying with these things that we experience in this way, the more we start to realize that we're identifying with it, and the more we're seeing that, you know, we're just sort of identifying with this thing as a self. Having this kind of knowing does start to liberate us in this way. We start to release our attachment to phenomena. And it really does open up this kind of radical sense of freedom in relation to everything that you actually experience, because you start to see everything in experience as it's just empty. It's just empty. All phenomena that I experience, it really is just empty. It's just stuff arising and passing away. It becomes a kind of realization again that whatever we experience is dependent on, you know, experience itself. It's the experience of consciousness itself. If you weren't conscious, you wouldn't experience anything. But the only things that you experience are just appearances in your conscious experience. So again, you know, we usually take the appearances in consciousness as something solid, as something tangible. But again, if we can just say, well, this thing is just an appearance, it's just dukkha arising and passing away. It's just phenomena arising and passing away. It's all dependently arisen on each other. We start to not identify with it. And we start to not grasp at it so much. So this is really about this way of about how we observe our experience. We see it in this kind of way where it's just interdependent. And again, we can start to meditate on these themes and start to meditate in this way where we're starting to see that, okay, well, I'm identifying, okay, a thought comes up in my mind. This thought comes up in my mind now. And I think it's my thought. I identify with it. It's me having the thought. It's me, Ajahn Sadaro. I think a thought. This thing has arisen in my mind, and I'm the owner of this thought. But if we start to see that, okay, well, this is just phenomena arising and passing away. This, there is no me that is there actually thinking this thought. It's just phenomena that arises and passes away. I see it now, the thought now, as empty of me. It's just a thought. There is no me there in that thought. It's just a thought. So if we look in this kind of way, then we actually start to, this is the thing that starts to allow us to gradually liberate and unbind. Again, we mightn't experience, full on nibbana, full on enlightenment. We mightn't experience these full on kind of past the arupa jhana states. But what we do is we start to disidentify from phenomena in this way. We start to detach in this kind of way. And this is essentially how we start to use emptiness more as a practice. And for me, it's one of the most, it's been one of the most kind of powerful reflections that I can do. It's not, so it's not just something, again, it's conceptually, it can be very hard to wrap your head around, but for me, it's been one of the most practical parts of my practice as well, in that, everything that I usually get like hung up on, everything that I usually get kind of worried about, everything, the kind of the existential dread that everything, nothing means anything, and what am I doing here kind of thing, the worry, the anxiety, all these kinds of like strange things that pop up in the mind, the anger at somebody, the kind of, all these different things. When we start to see that this is just something that's dependently arisen, it's just phenomena. It is, there is no, this thing, this anger that I have, there's no real essence to the anger. There's no real self in the anger. It's just anger. The existential dread, there's no self in the existential dread. There's no essence in the existential dread. It's just existential dread. So seeing things in this way it really allows you to release and unburden yourself from these things. And for me, as I said, it's been one of the most helpful ways of seeing, because, things just sort of happen. Things just sort of happen. They come up in experience, but you don't really get too involved in them too much. You can sort of just go, okay, this is just anger arising. There's no self in the anger. It's just anger. If I don't identify with it, if I really realize that it has no essence, this thing just dissipates. Again, we think back to how the Buddha described these things, like foam, like a bubble, like a mirage, like a magic trick, like a banana tree. While they appear substantive, the more we reflect in this way, we actually start to realize these things aren't substantive. They don't have an essence. They don't have a self within them. So with that, we'll probably, that's enough of me monologuing about these things. It's much more fun to actually talk and discuss about these kinds of things. So yeah, I'd like to, open it up now. If anybody has any thoughts, any reflections, anything, any kind of questions, we're much more fun to talk about these things than me, again, talking to blank squares. So yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, Ajahn.
No
That
problem.
was a very clear talk on such a complex topic. And yeah, and of course, even though we may appear as squares on your screen with no essence, we still would appreciate the conversations, like question and answer. So everyone in the chat and in person, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Either pop them in the chat or let Tina know, / if she's handing out papers, write them in the papers being handed out. This is a really complex topic. So it may be hard to understand or grapple with, or if you think too hard at it and you're not thinking the right way, like this is a great opportunity to ask Ajahn the questions. As we can hear, this is his main practice and he's quite, he knows quite a bit about it. So yeah, welcome all of your questions. Yeah, in the chat. I'll give you just a few seconds or minutes to write those down. And Ajahn, we already have a question.
Cool.
So,
Nice.
yeah, so it is easy for someone to develop a view of nihilism. Can
Yep.
I distinguish the view of nihilism versus perception of emptiness?
Yeah. Yeah, so with nihilism, there's this kind of view is that things don't really like mean anything in any kind of way. They don't. Nihilism is this kind of this idea that things don't have a meaning, things don't have a purpose in some kind of way. This is quite different from emptiness. Now, if you grasp these kinds of teachings the wrong way, yeah, you could fall into a kind of nihilism where things don't mean anything, things don't so we have to be careful about how we relate to these how we relate emptiness to the way we're experiencing the world. It shouldn't be so a kind of nihilism, and obviously it has this kind of negative undertone of a kind of rejection of existence. We're rejecting existence in a particular kind of way. Things don't mean anything. We don't want things. They have no purpose. It's all useless. There's this pushing away. There's this rejection in this way. Whereas a reflection on emptiness and just seeing that phenomena arises and passes away and it doesn't really have a substance, this is a deep kind of acceptance of existence, that existence just is the way it is. Now, it's not this, and so nihilism might have this kind of cold view of that, of like, well, this is just the way life is. There's evil in the world, and evil occurs. Bad things occur. Whereas from this emptiness perspective, it's one would still sort of see it's like this is just phenomena arising and passing away. But where there is again, it's not this kind of cold view of existence. It's this kind of very full and accepting and free and opening and releasing. And so there's a kind of positive effect to seeing things with emptiness, not a kind of negative pushing away of a kind of nihilistic approach. So I think if we're reflecting with emptiness, we're basically accepting reality as it is. We're accepting the good and the bad, and that this is the way it is. And we're not sort of like pushing things away into this kind of things don't have meaning, things don't have purpose. So yeah, but you obviously have to be careful of these things. I've fallen down many nihilistic spirals in my existence, so I understand the inclination. So yeah, but we do just have to be careful of this kind of thing. So if the reflection of emptiness is leading you towards these kind of cold, rejecting kinds of states where things don't mean anything, that have no purpose, probably pull back from them. We don't have to use these practices all the time. They can just be a nice way to reflect on some phenomenon. If it is leading down that way, yeah, pull back and just try something else.
Thanks, Ajahn. And when you're saying that, Tina raised your hand. Tina, would you like to unmute yourself and
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Ajahn, I was going to ask, do you think that with nihilism, one difference between that and emptiness is that with nihilism, there is still a sense of self that is doing that rejection?
Yeah,
whereas for emptiness, the whole point of that is even the self or the observer in meditation,
yeah,
that's let go of.
Yeah, really. Yeah, that's a really good point. there's a there's a full identification with experience that, you know, that it is all that it is all suffering and it is all terrible, you know, that it is all bleak and it is all dark, and there is a full kind of self view in there. And you know, you're right, from the Buddhist perspective, it's like the kind of reflection on emptiness. It's like, well, no, there is sort of no self that is there, so this is actually quite freeing. So yeah, that's a really good point, and a really good way to think about it as well.
And while I've got the floor as well, I just want to say thank you for how you've explained also the process towards emptiness as well. Because sometimes, particularly those who practice the jhanas, and how you've described it, that even when you get to those states where it is in the arupa jhanas and there is still, for example, that sense of nothingness, some people may confuse that with emptiness. But as you say, if that nothingness is still an object and there is still an observer of that object, then again, that is also not the state of emptiness. So I just want to say thank you. That was a very clear description of the path, the practice, as well as also what emptiness is.
Yeah, hopefully it's encouraging to like test it out and say, okay, I need to try to find out what this thing is. I need to get the arupa jhanas to find out what this like nothingness is. This would be great.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. But again, these are deep, you know, these are deep kind of, again, arupa jhanas are deep states, but yeah, we can also do this in like very mundane ways as well. You know, you can do this in really, really like there's a glass in front of me. There's a glass in front of me, and it's like, well, I perceive a glass at the moment. You know, there is an object of glass. It has a glass essence to it. You know, I think a glass is a glass and it has a glass-like essence to it. But if I just sort of see, it's like, well, this is just an object. This is just an object that's here. You know, it's compounded of many different kinds of things, you know, so the essence that I think it has, it doesn't really have that thing. It's just a compound. It's just this massive, it's this compound. It is just this thing that's like it now just appears to me as an object in experience. But really it's, you know, again, if I just move my eyes, it is not there anymore. It is not an object in like, if I look over here, it's not an object in experience anymore. So it now, like this, my experience now becomes empty of the glass. So all these like very just mundane, simple kinds of ways we can look at the world, where we actually start to see, actually, you know, here are those aspects of my experience where it becomes empty of things. It becomes empty of objects. You know, so yeah, there's, again, the jhanas and all this stuff is cool, but you can really do like and I think the nice thing about it is like, and I'm very much an enthusiast of this, is like, be creative in your practice. You know, be creative, like reflect, you know, try to reflect in different ways. We don't really have to do these kind of route kind of practices. Try to be very creative and try to reflect in these different kinds of ways, where it's like, it allows you to see these things in ways that suit you. Reflect on emptiness in a way that actually suits you and that what makes sense to you. And for me, that's, you know, I think that's quite a nice thing. So yeah, we can do these awesome things with the jhanas, but yeah, we can also just see it in our daily lives and in our everyday existence. I think that's sort of, you know, that's where the fun is, because that's where most of our existence is lived. It's not, you know, great, you know, it'd be great to be in the jhanas all the time, in the arupa jhanas, but you know, most of the time we just, you know, we're, you know, stuck on the bus or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ajahn, and thank you, Tina, for that comment as well. You're right, we're stuck on the bus and we're in real life most of the time. So there are different ways we can practice, like whether it's on or off the cushion. So thank you for sharing that we can do that both ways and how to do that. Would you also say that that's linked with sort of, because contemplation of emptiness can really create headaches. As I'm thinking about this, I feel like if I'm thinking too hard, it creates some, you know, it's very easy to go into nihilism or get those. So would you nihilism or this doesn't exist and kind of be tangled up in it? So would you say that a good measure of how to balance the conceptual thinking or the practice is if you're craving hatred delusion arising or falling, so is it making you happier or not happy? And or is there any other way that we can also watch ourselves while we potentially practicing emptiness so that we're not like creating extra suffering or too much extra suffering for ourselves?
So what it should be bringing up is this feeling of release. You're releasing an object, or you're releasing a perception in experience. You're releasing identification with something. So it should be a release, and it should be relieving to let go of this thing. So if it is bringing up this kind of headache and just sort of overthinking of things, it's like, every now and again, like thinking like that is good, because you try to think through a problem, and there's a time and there's a place for that. But if you're trying to do it as a part of your meditation, it should be more leading towards that kind of releasing. That's really the kind of the litmus test of if your reflection of emptiness is going in the right kind of way. Again, I started the talk by saying like that emptiness, it's a way of seeing. It's a way of observing. So if we're observing in a particular kind of way and it's building up that tension, it's building up that kind of agitation, it's building up that kind of, again, further identification and confusion and all these kinds of things, we're seeing and we're observing in the wrong way. So again, it's a kind of seeing, it's a kind of observing. So if we see and observe in a particular way where it's doing that, that's going the wrong way. But if we're seeing and if we're observing in this way, things are releasing. Things are, there's a kind of relief there because there's no identification with things. So so that's really the kind of litmus test with this stuff. And again, every now and again, it is actually like fun to like sit there and like think very hard about these things and like confuse the hell out of yourself. It's like that's how you understand things a lot of the time. But again, don't do that when you're sort of you've only got like 15 minutes in the day to meditate. Don't waste that time sitting there and like doing that then.
Yeah. Thank you, Ajahn. That's very helpful. And we now have a very practical question. So someone asked, I would like to ask Ajahn, as lay Buddhist, upon learning that everything has no essence, including our family and things around us, the first reaction is negative, like we lose motivation. How do we turn this into liberation, like you said?
Well, and this also like ties into the nihilism comment as well. If we really look at things as having no essence, as things that are just arising and passing away, instead of having this kind of, I don't care about these things, I don't, these are just phenomena that arise and pass, I don't care about these things. We actually learn to cherish our experience a lot more. We value these things a lot more because we know that they're impermanent. We know that they're just something that arises and passes away. We also know that, and if you remember what I said about emptiness being, it's not that things are independent, but we're interdependent. If we look at things in this way, as like, my family and all these kinds of things, I am absolutely interdependent on them. They are interdependent on each other. They are interdependent on the world that they find themselves in. They are interdependent with the whole genetic lineage that they're a part of. They're interdependent with the world and your house around you and the food that you eat and all these kinds of things. It's totally interdependent. So they're all still empty anyway, but they're so connected. Everything really is so connected. And so there's there also should be this appreciation that this, like this, okay, it has no self, no essence, but it's like it's fleeting. So I do have to take care of it, because if I don't take care of it, I screw the interdependence up. You know, this again, links in, you think about it as like links in causal chains. You know, everything is interdependent, everything is like causally interacting with each other. If I don't look after these things, I mess all this up. Even the smallest thing that I do can mess it up. So I actually think it brings about a kind of care to your existence. It's like, well, everything that I say, I have to be careful about. Everything I do, I have to be careful about. It's like, when I see my mum, it's like, I have to be careful. I have to pay attention to her. It's like, I don't know how, she's an appearance now. It's like, I don't know when she's going to appear again. Is she going to appear again? I don't know. If she appears, I talk to her, I see her. It's like, but this could never appear again. I don't know. So knowing this, we're actually a lot more cautious, and we're a lot more engaged, and we're a lot more immersed in experience in a different kind of way. It's not that we're rejecting it. We're fully in it. You're fully experiencing it, and you're fully doing, whatever you can with this appearance as it is right now. So, but yeah, I understand the inclination of like, oh, if everything's all empty, then, why bother with anything? It's all just empty. It's all just, deterministic machinations, and whatever I do is not going to matter in some kind of way. But this is wrong, I think. Again, if we're thinking about interdependence, we're thinking about dependent origination, thinking about causal connections. If you really truly see things like that, everything you do matters. Absolutely everything you do matters, because every thought, every word that comes out of your mouth, every action, it impacts everything. Impacts everything, and not just in your own life, but also onto the lives of others. Also, after you're gone, it still impacts the world after you're gone in some way. It changes the causal structure of the world. So really seeing that things have no essence and they're truly interdependent. Personally, I think this brings up a lot of care, because we see things as truly as that way, not this kind of thing that's like, oh, well, it's just a part of the world. So yeah, does that make sense? Or
Hope that makes sense for you. If it doesn't, please ask follow-up questions. And also Tina has put her hand up. So Tina.
Sorry. I think it absolutely makes sense. And Ajahn, would you say with this practice of emptiness, if anything, it really brings up a deep sense of compassion and intimacy with the way we live our lives, but also those around us? And there's so much gratitude, because we realize we're not just this single entity that did it on our own, but we come about because of so many causes and conditions. And because we're so interdependent with other people, and therefore we continue to be dependent on them and them on us. So I love that message that you've just shared, because some people do misunderstand. And I think you've cleared that up really, really well, because the practice of emptiness, if anything, it allows us to see that we aren't just this single entity, because we're not, but rather that we are a big part of everyone else, and their suffering and our suffering. There is no distinction.
And it's a massive take-home message, is like, what you do matters. Even though if things are all empty, and things are causal in some kind of way, what you do matters, because what you do changes the causal structure of the world. It changes so it does matter. These things really do matter. And if we're changing the causal structure of the world, this actually gives us the deepest sense of purpose that we can possibly have, because it's like, yeah, every little thing I do shapes the world in some kind of way. You can sort of think of it in this way as like, you can think of like 1,000 years, 1,000 years from now, you're dead and gone kind of thing. It's like, well, did my life matter? And again, you can take this sort of nihilist route with this. And it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. You're gone. Everybody forgets about you. But it's like, I think the thing to remember is like, you simply existing has changed the world. The world would not be the same way without you in it. Everything about the world changes. Everything about the structure of the world changes with you not in it. So everything that you do matters. The future is different if you don't exist. So even after, like, millions of years after your death, your life still does matter in this way. And the things that you do really matter because it changes how the world goes in this way. And so getting back to your point, Tina, of like the kind of compassion that comes up, there is this thing where you start to realize when you are like reflecting on emptiness in this way, it's like the suffering that you might bring into the world, like this now becomes your own. This now becomes your own suffering as well. So if somebody else suffers because of something that you do, this is your suffering. This is the world suffering. This is suffering that's moving on, not just beyond you and this other person, but again, the whole causal structure of the world. So it's impacting the world and the future as well. So it really does allow one to have greater compassion because it's like, I see suffering and I want to stop it. I want to get, I need to get out of this thing. I need to stop this thing because it's not just suffering for that person or me, but it really is suffering for everybody in some kind of way. So yeah, it really should be bringing up these very like positive qualities, not this kind of nihilism, sort of overly deterministic nihilism that, what I do doesn't matter because everything is determinate or everything's causal. So no, like because you're causal, everything really does matter because you change causality with every action that you take.
Thank you, Ajahn, and thank you, Tina. We had a comment in the chat from Richard. I think he said, "Thank you, Ajahn and Tina. That would really clarifies things," which is great. And as you were talking to Ajahn, it just reminded me of like if we attach to any concepts, it will create suffering for us. So if we attach to the concept of emptiness, what it is not, nihilism, that may be where like suffering can occur as well. So yeah, maybe it's just like practicing, and then like when you experience it, it really all will just make sense over time. But we do have another question.
Yep.
On that practical, well, I think practical
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
I'm curious on what Ajahn mentioned about after understanding that this is all just phenomena and will keep changing, we will feel so liberated. Kindly guide us to comprehend this more. You may have answered it a little bit, but
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
the question is, I'm curious on what Ajahn mentioned about after understanding that this is all just phenomena and will keep changing, we will feel so liberated. Kindly guide us to comprehend this more, please.
Okay. Yeah, I did touch on a little bit, but I'll maybe try to put it in a different kind of way. Usually so phenomena is just everything we experience, every visual thing that we experience, every sound, every thought that we have, this is just all phenomena. So that's my definition of what phenomena is. Now, usually, the phenomena that I experience, I really do identify with. It's like, it's me seeing things out in the world. It's me thinking these kinds of things. So whatever we identify with, we basically start to hold on to, and we identify with this thing. We start to hold on to it, grasp onto it. And again, it brings on this cascade of, oh, I like this coffee that I see in front of me. I like this kind of coffee. This sound that I hear, I don't like this sound. We start to identify. we start to identify with things, and the more we start to identify with things, the more kind of solid and sticky, and again, we just get dragged around by phenomena. So the phenomena that appears pulls us around all over the place, and we get lost in it. Once we start to see that it's just phenomena arising and passing away, it's just an appearance, it's just something that appears here, it loses its power to pull us around. It loses its power to deceive us. Again, the coffee, the coffee that's, coffee that there is like, yeah, look, I still like coffee, but like the kind of like, no, I need this coffee, I want this coffee. I really have to have this coffee. The power of being pulled around by this thing, it loses its strength. And so this starts to liberate you in this way, because it's not pulling, you're not, so you're basically like, we really are like a slave to the things that we perceive, because they're pulling us around all over the place. It's this kind of tyrannical master of like, oh, I like this, I don't like that, and we're just being pulled around by it. The more that we actually see, it's no, this is just appearances, this is just phenomena coming and going. We're not under that, we're not under that dictate anymore. We're not pulled around by it as much. So it is a cut, like we're liberated from it. And so then we're actually in a better position to go, do I engage with this thing or do I not engage with this thing? Again, usually we're just getting pulled by these things. But if we can sort of step back and see that it's just arising and passing, it's like we're liberated from being pulled by it, and we can more, reasonably, rationally, like choose what we actually interact with. I can get onto this whole other thing about choice and all these things, but it's like I think emptiness is confusing enough for tonight. But I have these whole other views about choice and all these kinds of things. But we'll leave that for another day.
We have to invite you back again, Ajahn. Like, we are out of time, but it's
No
not
problem.
enough time for the questions. But the person that asked the question said, very informative and clear. Thanks, Ajahn. For me, but I didn't do anything, so thanks for the question. Ajahn, so noting that we are sort of over on time, I just want to give you a big thank you for coming back to Metta Center and
No problem.
taking the time out of your busy schedule, like Tina said, and just giving us this really well thought out talk. I feel like it's very well structured. You put a lot of thought into it. You've added your experience, and and like especially the practical guide. If we want to practice it, what are the steps? And so really appreciative of that and your time. And I feel like we definitely have more grounds to cover. So can't wait to have you back again.
For sure.
And all the best for whatever it is that you have on going on in Melbourne, all the exciting projects.
Perfect.
So and anyway, so before we finish,
Shameless plug. I have an article coming out on Psyche next week. So if anybody wants to read that, I've written an article for Psyche about how meditation affects our morality. So if you want to look at something very easy and very digestible, that comes out on, I think, on Friday or something like that. The Psyche and Aeon. So yeah, if anyone wants to look that up, that'll be there.
Absolutely. And Zen asks, are you on our WhatsApp group, Ajahn? I'm assuming
probably not.
Post the link,
yeah,
or something if you would like to join the WhatsApp.
For sure. Just throw me on it. Throw me on the group.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Now.
Shall we do that now or later? Maybe later. We have Ajahn's number, do we?
No, I'm doing it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, sweet, perfect.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So before you leave, we'll keep an eye out for your article, like excited to read it. But before you leave, would you like to do a prayers or
for sure. For sure.
Yes,
I'll give a short blessing, and with this kind of blessing, again, I think the nice thing about blessings is like we start to think about like the goodness that we bring into the world and the goodness that we do. and the goodness that we can share in. And again, if we sort of take on some of the things I said seriously, it's like, you know, this goodness does impact the world in this way. And so anybody that does do some kind of act of goodness, we should, you know, rejoice in this, because again, this is making the world a little bit better. So I rejoice in all the goodness that you're doing here with the Metta Center. It is so nice to see you again. Tina and Zen, I've talked to you both about it. I love your Buddhist business model kind of thing. So I'm totally supportive of it. So really glad that it's reaching a lot of people, and really glad that it's impacting a lot of people. So I'll give a blessing now then. Sabba roko winimuto, sabba santa pawachito, sabba veramati kanto. Niputo jatuang pawasa pitio viwajam tu sabba roko vinasatumate pawatwantarayo. Sukhiti kayuko pawa abhivarana silisa nicham wadapa jayino jataro tammawadante. Ayuwano sukhang palang bawatu sapa mangalang rakantu sapa devata. Sapa buddhanupavena, sapa dhammanupavena, sapa sanghanupavena, sada soti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Ajahn.
Very good.
And thanks everyone for joining tonight's session as well. Ajahn, we're just going to do some announcements. You're very
Sure.
welcome to stay,
Yeah,
or you
go for
can leave. So we have, as always, Mondays 6:30 to 7:30, we have free meditation online and in person in Western Sydney University Bankstown campus. And we have free yoga on Tuesdays 6:30 to 7:30, that's in person. And Wednesdays, so talks like this, 7 to 8:30 p.m. online and in person on Wednesdays, and I'll be back again next Wednesday. So we also have a few initiatives. So Metta Connections, it's a website we've established where we connect lay Buddhists and their practice of right livelihood with the temples that may need their services. So the Buddhists can sign up as a volunteer or paid freelancer, and the temples can sign up with their projects, and each can find each other in that way. So if you like to, you could sign up yourself with your skills, so the temples that need your service could find you. Or if you have a business or you're connected to a monastery or a temple, you could also sign up projects on there, and then maybe people will be interested and they'll sign up. And you can also look for resources on that website too. So it's mettaconnections.com. And if you have any questions, you can always email Metta Center, contact@mettacenter.com for any clarification. And as always, you can subscribe our mailing list that's in the chat, make a donation, because our center is completely run by volunteers and on donation basis. So if you'd like to support us, if you feel inclined to, right, please give us a donation. And then also Metta Center chat group, you're very welcome to join our family on WhatsApp group, where you will hear about our latest initiatives, notifications, and news. We also have a very special event next Friday, Ajahn Brahmali's talk, this Friday at the Western Sydney University, and that's 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. For those of you who don't know Ajahn Brahmali, he is great. He's from Perth, and then he will be doing a little teaching tour in Sydney, and highly recommend to come this Friday. And I think that is all for tonight. And I just wanted to make a note of what Zen said as well. You know, like he said, he made a comment, the world definitely wouldn't be the same without you Metta Center friends too. So, you know, like on the spirit of emptiness and interdependencies, deeply appreciate having all of you joining us on the call today, and having you supporting supporting Metta Center, but also supporting each other by just asking questions, being here with each other with your presence, and while you're developing your own Dharma practice. So this is really wonderful, a wonderful illustration of emptiness and how that can alleviate us of suffering. I think that is all for tonight. Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome Wednesday night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Ajahn. Thanks, So. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. See you soon.
I think I know what your talk should be for next time.
What's that?
Maybe it should be about whether or not we have a choice.
Or
That
I spend so much time thinking about that, and I have very uncomfortable answers to it.
Oh, I can imagine.